My husband Brian is incredibly ambitious. His transition from a regional branch to the headquarters, where I work, appears to be fueled by a desire to climb the corporate ladder and become wealthy. This ambition made me wary of him. When we first met, Brian asked me, "Linda, your father is connected to our company, isn't he?" "Yes, I work for the company where my father serves as an executive. I've been viewed differently by people inside and outside the company because I have a relative in a position of power. However, time and time again, I've proven my worth through my skills and performance. In a way, my assertive nature might be suited for this type of environment." Despite my initial suspicion, Brian, being handsome and motivated, was a breath of fresh air compared to the all-talk men at headquarters. Working with Brian was enjoyable, and he was always proactive in his approach. I found myself gradually drawn to him. Brian proposed to me saying, "Linda, with you, I can give my all in both work and home. I believe we can make a great couple. Will you marry me?" I responded with, "Are you sure? I might get so absorbed in work that I may not be able to cherish you." We both are career-oriented, so we spend less time together at home and go out or travel less than most couples. But we trust each other and enjoy our time together. Therefore, I was happy. However, this spring, it was decided that Brian would be transferred alone to a regional branch. Brian, who enjoyed working at headquarters, was deeply disappointed, and I felt it was unfair given that we were newlyweds. However, I've heard that this is a crucial assignment that could lead to a promotion, and he should be able to return to the headquarters in about a year. With today's technology, we can video call via computer or smartphone. Given that we spend less time together anyway, we can manage our feelings of loneliness and distance. Besides, if I really miss him, I can always go visit. With this in mind, I saw off my husband with a smile. It's been about 3 months since Brian moved to the regional office. We video call each other once or twice a week to update each other on our lives. As I imagined, the world is convenient now, and if we carefully set aside time for long video calls, we don't feel lonely. "It seems like you're having fun there. I'd like to do things like visiting local attractions. Maybe I should come to visit during the summer vacation?" I casually mentioned, to which Brian responded with uncertainty. "Yeah, I'd love to see you. But they're working me non-stop. I'm not even sure if I'll get any summer vacation." "Oh, I see. Leading a project must be exhausting. Take care." I trust my husband's words, and I am saddened by that. Suddenly, I started to wonder about the interior of the apartment my husband, Brian, was renting, which was beyond his face. I thought that maybe he couldn't clean properly because he's so busy. But, looking at the part of the room visible on the screen, it seemed surprisingly tidy. It's impressive how he manages to keep things neat and tidy, despite being so busy. I was about to compliment him on that when I noticed an unfamiliar bag at the edge of the screen and couldn't say anything. The bag was a woman's item. Even someone like me, who is not very up-to-date with trends, could tell at a glance that it was a high-end brand. "Hey, what's that bag?" I naturally pointed out. Brian took a quick glance over his shoulder and replied a bit flusteredly. Look, it's a wedding anniversary gift. We don't get to see each other much, right? But I wanted to make sure to give you something tangible at least. How is it? It has a beautiful shape, and it comes with a matching coin purse, which will be handy, right? I thought it would suit you. I ordered it online, so I wasn't sure about the condition, that's why I unboxed it. I wanted it to be a surprise, but I guess I messed up, I'm sorry. No, it's fine. I'm happy, and I'm looking forward to its arrival. No matter how you think about it, it's suspicious. The excuse seems plausible, but there is a sense of mistrust. But at that time, I couldn't confront him. Because I still wanted to believe in Brian. Actually, the bag was indeed sent to me later, so it might have been rude to doubt him. The message card was filled with affectionate comments, and I was sincerely happy. However, despite having all this reassurance, I just couldn't erase the slight sense of distrust. I ended up not even taking the bag out of the box, and it's still in my closet. Several months have passed since then. On a day when I had gotten used to the life without Brian and to communicating via video calls. "Well, Brian, I should get going." Yeah. "It's getting colder, so be careful not to catch a cold, Linda." I was about to say thank you and end the call when the doorbell at my house rang. "What's wrong?" A courier has arrived." "You can hang up the call, Brian. See you later." Saying so, I got up and headed for the entrance. At the time, the thought of quickly receiving the package dominated my mind, so I couldn't even consider that I hadn't hung up the call or that the screen was left on. When I got the package and went back to my room, my husband's face was still on the computer screen. I guess this is the end of the call." For some reason, Brian seemed to think that his side of the remote connection had been cut off, even though his image was still being displayed on my side. I was about to call out to him when an unbelievable sight appeared on the screen, and I instinctively covered my mouth with my hand. There was a bed on the other side of the desk where Brian's computer was, and an unknown woman was sitting on it. Despite being broad daylight, she was in a bathrobe. What's more, I noticed that the exact same bag I'd said was a present for our recent anniversary was lying under the bed. Memories of a suspicion I had almost forgotten began to resurface in my mind. Brian had indeed brought a woman into his apartment. And it wasn't just once or twice. The woman was casually playing with her smartphone on the bed, appearing completely accustomed to being in Brian's room. "Oh, you seem to be having so much fun chatting with your wife," the woman said with a cackle, as if to mock me, who was not present. "That might be true, but she's not here now," Brian replied, grinning without realizing that I was listening. "You're such a jerk." "The real jerk is you, leaving your bag out in plain sight." "I had to buy the same bag just to camouflage it. It was expensive, you know." "That's your own fault. It's a shame that a luxury item like that is wasted on her. She has no sense of fashion." As they continued their playful banter, Brian and the woman laid down on the bed. I couldn't bear to watch any longer, so I shut down the computer. If I had to put my feelings into words, I would say I just felt regret. It seemed he had gifted me the bag as an anniversary present, but was it actually given to cover up his infidelity? "Brian, you're really the worst," I muttered, the insult slipping out before I could stop it. It's not something I really wanted to say. "And that girl is." I also felt something familiar about the woman he was cheating with. I'm sure she's the daughter of the executive vice president who joined the company this year. The audacity to bring her all the way out to the country for a secret rendezvous. It seems like quite an elaborate affair. But somehow, it makes sense to me. I can't help but chuckle, thinking it's a typical choice for an ambitious man like Brian. After all, I too am the daughter of a high-ranking executive. It's just like Brian to pick a mistress who could prove useful in some way. Now, I can't believe in anything anymore. I thought he loved me, as a person. Just when I got tired of feeling angry, I started feeling like I couldn't forgive him now. So, I decided to check the truth and took action. A few days after that shocking video call, Brian suggested we spend some leisure time together. Perhaps he thought it would look bad if we didn't pretend to be friendly from time to time. I responded with an eager yes to his suggestion. Holding the purse that Brian had given me, I visited the apartment he had rented. See, I keep it pretty clean, don't I? I'll go get us some iced tea. Watching Brian's back as he headed towards the kitchen, I saw my opportunity and took action. I quietly placed the coin purse that matched my bag inside the cupboard of Brian's computer desk. Unbeknownst to Brian, the coin purse contained a bug. It was a high-end model with excellent battery life, so it should continue to capture sounds for several days. Without any evidence, I wouldn't be able to complain. I assumed Brian would notice it, of course. But his mistress has the same one too. Would he be able to distinguish who owns which? If he does distinguish them, I'll just have to find another way. If he doesn't, that's a win for me. I'm excited to see what kind of information I can gather. When the battery is about to die, I'll call Brian to confirm. I seem to have lost the coin purse you gave me. Do you have it over there by any chance? Oh, yeah. It was wedged in the drawer of my desk. You're so clumsy. I guess Brian found the coin purse but didn't open it. I could guess from his casual response. If I ask him to send it back because I need it right away, the coin purse will be back in my hands within a few days. Then, as I nervously played the audio, there it was, clear as day, my husband Brian and the daughter of the executive having an illicit affair, their voices engaged in an intimate conversation. Based on this data, I hired a private investigator and had him look into this. As he dug deeper, it turned out that Brian was involved with many more women, not just the executive's daughter. There were so many, I couldn't even count them all on one hand, and they included daughters of board members and department heads. As for me, I began to uncover aspects of Brian that I never knew before, as I started listening to his colleagues in his department. Apparently, Brian had been struggling with his performance recently and seemed to be quite stressed. Realizing that his efforts alone were no longer sufficient to achieve results, he must have shifted his focus from work to networking. I feel genuinely sorry for him. Failing to perform can be a hard pill to swallow. However, that has nothing to do with him betraying me and having affairs with other women. Moreover, he seems to be plotting to use these women as stepping stones to further his career. It's a despicable behavior, both as a man and as a professional. As I continued to investigate on my own, I felt my feelings for Brian quickly cooling off. And a feeling of vengeance began to sprout within me, for he had wounded my pride. Brian's work assignment away from home ended sooner than expected, before even a year was up. He returned home. To celebrate his return, I invited both of our parents and threw a home party. With a feast delivered to our door, lively music playing, and just family around, the atmosphere of our small party was quite jovial. Wait, the music's vibe has changed. And is that my voice? The speakers synced to the music player started blasting Brian's conversation with the executive's daughter throughout the house. Brian turned pale, confused and flustered. What's this, Linda? I had already explained the situation to my parents. However, Brian's parents were in a state of panic, hearing their son's voice entangled with a woman's they didn't recognize, and started to confront him. Brian, what's the meaning of this? Surely, you're not cheating on Linda? By playing the audio recordings of Brian's conversations with the other women, which I obtained with the help of the investigator, Brian finally realized that I knew about his affairs. Linda, you knew everything, didn't you? Trembling, Brian turned to me with a question. With a smile, I responded, why not consider marrying the CEO's daughter next? That'll land you the CEO position in a snap. Though, considering that I've spread these recordings to all the other women you've been involved with, I'm not sure you'll be able to handle the job even if you become CEO. At that, Brian clung to me, his face a picture of despair. You also prefer a successful man on the fast track to promotion, right? It was a necessary step for my career, please overlook it. But what about us? Is our marriage also just a step towards your success? No, that's not it at all, he quickly replied. You are special. Despite his words, Brian seemed flustered. When he was at a loss for words, my father stepped in and addressed him. Brian, did you approach my daughter to take advantage of my position? Tell us the truth. In response to my father's earnest question, Brian confessed. Initially, it was about getting ahead. Even though other women were merely tools for my advancement, I am truly serious about Linda. I promise I won't cheat again. Please forgive me this time. I want a chance to make it right. It was hard to judge whether he was lying or telling the truth. Yet, after such blatant infidelity, even when he claims that I'm the only special one, I find it hard to trust him. It's not my place to decide. My father continued. It's up to Linda. I can't even tell if you really mean what you're saying. But I can tell you this much, I despise you, and I can't accept you as my sister-in-law. Even Brian's parents seemed doubtful of their son's honesty. Brian, we want to believe in you. But we know that you've always had a strong desire to overcome your small-town upbringing and make it big in the city. That's why, even with all the evidence piled up against you, we find it hard to believe that Linda is truly special to you. Frankly, we regret the way we raised you. Even you guys! While my father's words certainly had an impact, it seemed that the disbelief of his own parents hurt Brian the most. Regardless of what others said, the decision to trust Brian or not was ultimately up to me. I decided to be honest about my feelings. I cannot trust a man who has repeatedly lied to me, deceived me, and even ridiculed me with another woman. I love my work and I appreciate professional success. But that's why I always want to achieve success on my own. I would never stoop so low as to use someone else for my gain. But I'm telling you that you're different. Why are you abandoning me? We're married, aren't we? If you really considered us to be married, if you truly cherished me, why would you give me the same handbag that you gave to the woman you're having an affair with? And on our anniversary, of all times. Stop making a fool of me. I don't want to share a family with a lazy man who depends on others to get ahead. I want a divorce. With those words, it seemed Brian had given up. His shoulders drooped, and he began to sniffle out of frustration. Well, he had just lost his most convenient stepping stone for his career, so it served him right. Exhausted, Brian was taken home by his parents. It was unlikely he would ever return to our home. Following through on my words, I divorced Brian. After I exposed Brian's wrongdoings to all the women involved, he was sued not only by me but also by all the women he had affairs with. Brian couldn't possibly pay all the settlement money with the money he had. He was forced to sell all his properties and even had to take on debt. Brian will probably lose his freedom for a while, paying back his debts. He voluntarily resigned from his company, but in reality, he was practically fired. Once the rumor of his actions reached the higher-ups, it was inevitable they would be furious. With rumors spreading around the office, he probably felt uncomfortable as well. Currently, he's working in a small factory he managed to find employment at, diligently paying back his debts. His parents told me about his situation when they came to apologize. As for me, I have no intentions of ever meeting him again. Of course, I received the alimony from Brian. As for the handbag, which was the same as his mistress's, I was surprised when I sold it for almost the same price as a new one because it was barely used. It felt like a little bonus. After separating from Brian, I began to contemplate what marriage really meant and what's important in life. What's most important to me might still be my work, just like before. However, it's not like I don't have dreams of having a family. I might use the money from selling the bag to pamper myself a bit, preparing for a new romance as I head to work today. After covering my son Paul's wedding costs.
Why only $10,000 for your son's big day? If you're the parent, you should pay the full amount.
Right after that, my husband Donald, who had never yelled before.
Shut up, kid. What? Just $10,000? For my wedding party, that's it?
My son, whom I've cherished more than my life, started laughing as if mocking us.
If you're the parent, pay the full amount. Poor thing.
Is this really my son? After divorcing my ex-husband, who was drunk and harmful, I remarried Donald, and we've been happily living as a family of 3. Gentle and kind Donald warmly and strictly raised Paul, who was not his blood-related son. To anyone looking, they were father and son, very close. Like his father, my son grew into a kind and gentle boy and successfully became independent as an adult. Living together since his marriage, the life of just the 2 of us after our son left felt somehow fresh. While enjoying a calm life, suddenly, we got the news that our son had married. It was so sudden and, moreover, we were informed after the fact. Though surprised, we accepted it since he was an adult, but his wife seemed to come from a wealthy family. But that's not what concerned me about her. To put it nicely, she's outspoken and unafraid to speak her mind. To put it poorly, she's insensitive and blunt. Perhaps her personality has influenced my son. As far as I knew, my son was not the type to act that way even after receiving money. He was not the kind of child who would disdainfully call his parents poor. Shock and surprise made my mind go blank. Is this person really my son? I'd rather be told he's just a stranger who happens to look like me. It would be easier on my heart. At that moment, a loud bang echoed as the table was struck, and my usually calm husband erupted in anger.
Shut up, kid.
His eyes were filled with a contempt and anger I had never seen before. Mary got married at the age of 25. Soon after getting married, we were blessed with a child, and I raised our child as a housewife. It was when our son Paul was 1 year old that I divorced my previous husband, Robert.
It's Mary's fault for making me angry. Cut it out already.
When drunk, he would curse at me like that, punching and kicking around the house, throwing things. His bad drinking habit seemed to worsen day by day, and it seemed he was becoming more intolerant to alcohol. In addition to yelling loudly, he seemed to throw things to further intimidate me, and there were times when I was hit and injured. Even then.
Can't you even dodge? It's not my fault.
Once, he threw a glass at me while I was holding our son. I instinctively shielded my son. The glass hit my temple and broke. That was when I decided to divorce, fearing that Paul might get injured someday. Robert's drinking problem was only getting worse, and I couldn't guarantee that something life-threatening wouldn't happen someday. I was determined to protect my son, but if something were to happen to me while we were still married, this man would become the guardian of my son. I couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't commit a life-threatening assault. I had to avoid such a terrifying scenario at all costs. So, bleeding from my head, I rushed to the hospital open at night, holding my son, and had them make a medical certificate. We discussed the situation further at the hospital and decided to have them contact the authorities on our behalf. This action officially recognized my son and me as victims of abuse and successfully introduced a third party between Robert and me. Robert was very charming in public, always acting like the perfect husband whenever anyone else was around, especially when he wasn't drinking. That's why it was crucial to have an outsider involved. Eventually, the divorce was finalized. Robert said, "I was just sad that Mary stopped prioritizing me after our child was born. But it just showed how self-centered he was, a disappointment to the end. He only made the first payment for the settlement and child support, which was a few $100s, and then stopped. I tried to follow up initially, but after he started avoiding me and reacting angrily, I gave up. I never really had high hopes to begin with. After the divorce, I approached the company I worked for before getting pregnant, explained my situation, and asked if they could rehire me, and they did. So, I managed to secure enough income to keep us from poverty. What's important is spending time with my son and staying healthy enough to continue working. To do that, I knew I needed to eliminate stress from my life. I want to live with Mary and Paul. The person who stood by me through these trying times was Donald, who joined the company after I had left. I couldn't believe a man in his mid-20s, for years younger than me, with no history of divorce or children, would say such a thing to someone like me. I want to date you, Mary, but I also want to get married soon. You shouldn't speak so lightly of marriage. At first, I couldn't trust Donald. I thought his youth meant he had an idealized view of marriage and wasn't thinking it through. For someone who had already failed at marriage once, those were not the words I wanted to hear. When we get married, we can always be together, and we can share the chores and take care of Paul together, right? Plus, to truly become Paul's father, I need to marry first. Is it to become Paul's father? Of course, I love you, Mary, but I also think of marrying both you and Paul. I was at a loss for words. I hadn't thought he felt that way. Was he serious? I want to share the same responsibility for Paul. I think that's what it means to stand by you, Mary. And I hope to be included as well. Seeing him smile, I felt the ice around my heart begin to melt. Donald always considered me and Paul together. He never just asked me out for a meal after work. Instead, he would offer to help carry groceries and even bring them to our apartment. Lately, when I had to leave work early because I wasn't feeling well, I'll pick up Paul from preschool on my way back from my rounds, so please call the preschool, he'd say, and he'd even bring back dinner for Paul and me. Paul was very fond of Donald, and seeing them laugh together made me happy too. By marrying, I gain a lot of rights. To be a husband, a father, a family member. So, please marry me, for my sake. I knew he phrased it that way so as not to burden me, but hearing him say it made me very happy. So, when Paul turned 3, Paul and I decided to remarry Donald. Even though there was no blood relation, Donald and Paul had a close father-son bond. We never told Paul they weren't blood-related. It wasn't that we tried to hide it, there just never seemed to be a need or an opportunity to mention it. Because to us, they were undoubtedly father and son. Because they were unmistakably father and son. Donald gave Paul both kindness and strictness. Our household gained another earner, which brought us a bit of financial leeway, allowing us to build a respectable house, though not a mansion. Paul grew up healthy without major illnesses, went to college, became a working adult, and now he has moved out and is living on his own. Currently, Donald and I live together in this house, working. This is the first time we've lived just the two of us since we met, and it feels a bit odd, but I think spending time together leisurely isn't too bad. It's been a few years since our son Paul started working. One day, out of the blue, we got a message. I got married. I'll come over with my wife this weekend. It was quite the surprising news. We hadn't even heard he was dating anyone, and now he's married. He mentioned they are planning a party and will set a date once everything is decided. Well, he's an adult now, so as long as he takes responsibility for his decisions, that's fine. But getting married without any prior notice was indeed a shock. I wondered if there was some urgent reason, like a pregnancy, but that wasn't the case. Our son has always been a bright and kind boy since childhood. Though he had his moments of rebellion, he was always able to reflect on his actions, so he never really behaved too badly. There was never any cooling of relations within the family, and even after he became independent, he frequently came home to share meals just like before. So, Donald and I were both puzzled by this sudden announcement of marriage.
Welcome back, Paul. I'm home. This is my wife, Jessica.
On the weekend, Paul came home with his wife. The woman named Jessica, standing next to Paul, smiled and nodded slightly. She was slim, with a gentle demeanor, very beautiful.
Please come in.
I called out to Paul and Jessica, and they entered the room, following Donald down the hallway. I ended up bringing up the rear, but noticed Jessica scanning the house as she moved. Though she followed behind Paul, her gaze flitted restlessly to the stairs and closed doors, and this behavior didn't change even after entering the living room. It was strangely unsettling to watch someone scrutinize another's home so openly, and my curiosity was as piqued as my discomfort. What kind of person was this woman? We sat down at the dining room table to talk. Paul mentioned that Jessica was 2 years his junior and a newcomer who had joined the company this spring. Being 25, she might have transferred from another company. Jessica's parents are well-known corporate chairpersons, and she grew up in a home always attended by housemaids, who took care of everything for her. In other words, she came from wealth. This information all came from Paul, while Jessica sat quietly beside him, not uttering a single word.
Would you prefer coffee or tea? What kind of work do you do at the company? I hear you're thinking of having a party. Any preferences for the venue or theme?
Even when asked such questions, Jessica would just cover her mouth and whisper to Paul. He would answer on her behalf, and Jessica would smile with narrowed eyes. It was incredibly frustrating.
Jessica, I know we've just met and you might be hesitant, but feel free to speak up, okay?
Donald must have felt the same way. Unable to hold back, he said this, but Jessica remained silent, just smiling with her mouth covered. The pattern of Paul speaking for her continued.
We're just here to report today.
And they left rather quickly, without us ever hearing Jessica's voice.
It's just, well.
After the two left, Donald and I could only look at each other and mutter. Are young people these days really like that? No, even the new employees at the company aren't like that. They don't even introduce themselves. They don't make proper eye contact. Not a word of greeting or thanks. Yet, they unabashedly stare around the house, and when we give them a parting gift, they don't say thank you, nor do they feel ashamed for coming empty-handed. It's really strange. Feels like meeting aliens. In any case, the sense of discomfort is very strong.
If they're married, all the more reason. It's another household, after all. If Paul and his partner manage on their own, that's all that matters.
I think so too. Maybe just keeping in touch to a reasonable extent is best? Donald seemed to feel the same way. He says with a wry smile. Neither of us wants to live together, nor do we have a strict view about our son's wife. So, we both thought that meeting up occasionally would be just right for both parties. That's what I thought, but for some reason, Paul started coming home frequently with Jessica. Maybe because they don't live far away, so it's an easy trip. However, Jessica still doesn't speak a word. Even if I ask something, she whispers to Paul, and Paul answers. Naturally, the conversation doesn't get lively, but the frequency of them having dinner at our place or staying over has increased, and honestly, it's nothing but stress. Today, while I was preparing dinner, I got a message from Paul saying, "We're coming over." Given the timing, I had no choice but to ask if they were planning to have dinner, and of course, the answer came back as if it was expected. Paul and Jessica stay holed up in Paul's room upstairs, not helping with the preparations. Ever since he was young, Paul was always eager to help me with meal prep. Now that he doesn't, it feels bittersweet.
I'll go call Paul and the others.
After getting help from Donald to get dinner ready, I decided to go upstairs to call the two of them.
I really wonder about this.
As I went up the stairs, I could hear a voice. Not Paul's voice. A woman's voice I hadn't heard before, so it must be Jessica. This was the first time I heard her speak.
Isn't this too old-fashioned? Is this house secondhand?
No, it's not. Your father and mother are so plain, and both the house and the people seem poor. It's depressing. My first thought was, so this is her true nature. Though I was infuriated by her rude remarks and scornful complaints, it felt like the unease I had been feeling deep down was finally clear.
If you don't cut ties with such an old-fashioned family home, it's divorce for us.
Yeah, I'll think about it. Afterwards, I casually found the right moment to call out from outside the room, and the four of us spent a dinner time that wasn't as lively as usual, with Paul and Jessica just eating before leaving. Sigh. I'm disappointed in Jessica's personality and Paul's lack of judgment, but what irritates me the most is Paul saying he'll think about it after being told it's divorce unless he cuts ties. Over post-dinner coffee, just Donald and I shared exactly what I had overheard before dinner. I'm mad at Jessica for casually throwing around the word divorce, and at Paul for considering cutting off his parents and his childhood home. Easy now. Let's calm down a bit. As my anger slowly grew with time, Donald tried to soothe me by stroking my back. Putting his wife first isn't a bad thing for a husband to do. I guess so. They're young, so maybe they can only see things from their perspective right now. Let's wait and see a bit longer. True, considering they're newlyweds. Jessica is young and was raised in a wealthy family. I'm disappointed Paul chose someone like her, but it's fine. Paul's life is his own. After all, even if we're family, we're different people. It wouldn't be strange for our paths to diverge. That's an extreme view, but if it comes to that, we can't do much. Paul is kind at heart, and maybe he'll manage to bridge the gap between Jessica and us. Donald's faith in Paul was evident. Raised by the ever-calm Donald, who never resorted to unjust anger or raised his voice, Paul had grown into a considerate and gentle young man. I trusted him too, but couldn't shake off a feeling of unease about what lay ahead.
We've decided on the details for the party. Want to talk about it tomorrow?
So, as usual, Donald and I welcomed Paul and Jessica into our home. We sat at the dining table, and as usual, only Paul spoke. Paul, this. I placed an envelope filled with cash on the table in front of Paul. Use this for the wedding party expenses. This money had been saved since my divorce. With a determination to protect Paul no matter what came our way, even if it meant saving little by little for him. Donald knew about this savings account, and since our remarriage, had suggested we contribute a fixed amount monthly. We had already taken out insurance for Paul at the time of our remarriage and were making monthly payments. This savings was partly for my own satisfaction, funded from money I could spare, so there were times I couldn't contribute. Still, we had reached our goal of $10,000. That's why I thought it was the right time to give it to Paul. Paul took the envelope, opened it, and looked inside.
For my son's big day, just $10,000?
Those were Paul's words. Jessica leaned over to peek inside.
If you're the parent, you should pay the full amount, poor thing.
Paul sneered mockingly, his mouth twisting unpleasantly, with Jessica making a similar face beside him. My mind went blank. Is this really my son before me? I didn't expect tears of joy, but I hoped it would be helpful for Paul.
Shut up, kid.
A loud bang on the table and a shout. It was Donald. Both Paul and Jessica were startled, frozen in shock, but so was I. Donald had never raised his voice like this before.
Now's a good time to say this. Paul and I have no blood relation. Huh?
Paul's surprised voice echoed. It made sense he'd react that way. We had never mentioned it before, and I hadn't expected Donald to reveal it at such a moment.
Paul has been with us since he was 2 years old, and when he turned 3, Mary and I remarried, making Paul officially part of the family.
Paul was at a loss for words.
Mary divorced her ex-husband to protect Paul.
I had told Donald everything. The records of dealings with the authorities during the divorce. The medical reports and photos of injuries. Photos of the destroyed home were all shown.
Even when Mary was injured by her husband's violence, she protected Paul at all costs. She divorced to avoid any harm coming to Paul. That was when Paul was 1 year old. The ex-husband ran off without paying any compensation or child support. Naturally, there was never any contact from him wanting to see Paul. That was what Mary couldn't forgive the most. She worked hard and saved this money for Paul. Even after marrying me, she continued saving in that bank account from the money she was free to use. Despite there being hardly any leeway,
I thought of this bank account as a self-satisfaction, fulfilling my selfish parental pride by doing something for Paul. After marrying Donald, we were financially more comfortable. We didn't have to worry about daily expenses. We could buy necessary school supplies when needed. We were able to get insurance. We could pay the tuition fees without delay. All thanks to Donald. But since Paul is my child, I wanted to do something for him.
I may not be blood related to Paul, but I love him as my son.
I truly believe that. I think Donald and Paul are like real father and son.
But in a different dimension, Mary loves Paul.
It's incomparable to me.
I think it's meaningless even to compare.
It's embarrassing to have it put into words again, but I think it's true. Paul is more precious to me than my own life. I've felt that way since he was conceived.
Then what did you say just now? Say it again. I'm sorry.
When Donald raised his voice to question, Paul apologized just as loudly.
Really, I'm sorry. That's right, I vaguely remember. The old apartment we used to live in when I was little, and moving out from there. Do you remember? You only lived there until you were 3.
It was when Donald and I moved to a spacious condominium when we got married.
Sorry, thank you. Mom and Dad, thank you.
Paul, looking us straight in the eye, had the same kind face of the gentle son he's always been.
Really, I'm sorry. I'll think it over again. We'll plan a ceremony that we can actually afford, just the 2 of us. What? Wait a minute.
The one who cut in was Jessica. It was the first time she spoke up in front of us.
I'm not changing the plan, okay? I actually want to add more options. There are so many more things I want to do.
Jessica, shouting at Paul, was nothing like the demure image she had presented. Selfish, hysterical, and self-centered.
We live this modestly, so you must have saved more money, right? It's your son's wedding, so pay up.
Jessica then directed her hostility towards me as well. I wasn't surprised by Jessica's words, but what an outrageous woman she was. I sighed before deciding to speak up.
Paul just said it, didn't he? We should consider within the budget of both your savings and what I can contribute. Are you kidding? If it's going to be such a poor-looking party, better not have it at all. Then maybe it's best not to have it? No, if there's no party, then there's no point in getting married.
It was utterly illogical. Where should I even start to make them listen?
How much is the party costing now?
$80,000.
$80,000? How much can you two contribute?
Suddenly, Jessica fell silent. She shifted her gaze to Paul. I can only manage $10,000. Jessica says it's impossible for her.
If Jessica's family is wealthy, couldn't you ask them for support?
Jessica's parents said they wouldn't give any money. Jessica was told you'd understand why. Wasn't hers supposedly a rich family? Yet, why wouldn't they pay for their daughter's party? Donald and I exchanged puzzled looks. When we all stared at Jessica, waiting for her to explain, she made a face as if she'd tasted something bitter. Jessica.
It's impossible. But why?
I overspent a bit.
On what?
Dad's credit card. Jessica gradually answered Paul's questions. It turned out Jessica was given a credit card by her father as pocket money, which she used for shopping. However, her spending spiraled out of control, maxing out the credit card limit, and her parents were furious. Realizing they had spoiled her too much, they decided not to give her any more money, no matter the situation, to make her experience earning her own money. She was placed in the same company as Paul through a family connection. Yet, it seems Jessica hadn't saved anything at all. Living at home, she shouldn't have had living expenses, but the habit of spending money as if it were infinite was hard to break. That's why Jessica's parents decided not to contribute financially to the party. They probably believe it won't be until Jessica adopts a normal sense of money that this stance will change, but for now, it's deemed impossible.
Then $80,000 is impossible. That's why you should ask your real family to pay.
Paul whispered his feelings meekly, but Jessica pressed him loudly.
Didn't I say? If we don't share the same view on money, we can't get married. There's no point in marrying someone who doesn't have money. I have no use for poor people.
Jessica is the poorest here.
What did you say?
Jessica was infuriated by Paul's blunt words. Probably the last thing she wanted to hear.
After calling my family poor, to think you're the poorest is just ridiculous. Anyway, let's apologize properly. Of course, I need to apologize too. If you don't have money, there's no use for you. We're getting a divorce anyway.
Jessica's attitude seemed nothing more than a string of whims, and Paul's response became sluggish. It must be exhausting when the conversation goes nowhere. Why did Jessica marry Paul? So, I decided to ask what I wanted to know. She seemed capable of answering. I wanted to marry someone from the same company. Why someone from the same company? If you marry someone from the same company, you can quit your job, right? I see. That used to be quite common. When colleagues from the same workplace got married, it was often the woman who quit. Maybe that culture still exists at Paul and Jessica's company. I don't want to work anymore. If I get married, I can quit, right? I can't quit right now because of the wedding guests, but I'm quitting as soon as the party's over. It felt wrong on many levels, but at least it was clear that Jessica's parents' intentions weren't getting through at all. What a pity. Why did you always whisper to Paul and let him do the talking? I was simply curious. I couldn't understand why she would do such a thing.
It's because I didn't want to talk to someone who reeks of poverty. I didn't want to be tainted by it. Plus, they'd listen if it's their son talking, right?
I was amazed that there were actually people who would say something like this, a clear mistake. At this point, there's really no saving her.
Jessica, can you explain this?
I took an envelope from the cabinet behind me and spread its contents on the table for Jessica to see. It was several photos. In all of them, Jessica was pictured, but she was arm in arm or embracing men who were not Paul. And each photo featured a different man.
Jessica, what is this about? It's what I want to know. What is this?
Jessica panicked at Paul's question. But I wasn't about to let it slide.
These are evidence of your affairs, aren't they? What? Are you serious? Did you hire a detective?
Correct. When I heard Jessica threatening divorce if my son's ties with our family weren't cut, I wondered why she would so easily resort to divorce. The discrepancy between her public facade and her true nature seemed too large, raising my suspicion. So, I had a detective investigate, including any affairs. The results were striking. Or perhaps more aptly, they were a complete miss. It appeared she had been dating several men, hiding the fact that she was married.
Are you dating these men to get them to buy you things? Of course. If I can't buy them myself, someone else has to.
Is there a need to go to hotels?
Shut up. Shut up. It's none of your business.
Jessica seemed resigned, not bothering to hide her actions anymore. This concerns me, though. Paul spoke in a low voice. Jessica flinched but soon glared at Paul with sharp eyes.
We're getting a divorce.
Of course. And I'll be seeking compensation.
Why?
You should know why. Paul glared back at Jessica. Her assertive stance seemed to leave her speechless, and she stood up abruptly.
I'm leaving. I've had enough.
With those words, she stomped off and left. The sound of the door closing echoed, and we all sighed deeply together. Paul and Jessica's divorce was finalized without issue. Though we sought compensation, the likelihood of receiving full payment was slim. Worse, Jessica had accumulated debt from purchasing expensive bags and shoes that she had insisted Paul buy for her, with Paul co-signing the loans. Given Jessica's likely bankruptcy, all debt repayment responsibilities would fall on Paul, potentially demanded in full due to his guarantor status. After consulting with a lawyer, it seemed manageable through debt restructuring, so that was the planned course of action. Although they divorced, the obligation to repay the debts didn't disappear, and having to pay a large amount of debt for a woman he no longer loved is a sad tale. However, it can only be considered an expensive lesson learned. All I did was have a lawyer send letters to Jessica's affair partners. The letters insinuated that they might be liable for the debts Jessica incurred during the marriage, questioning if they were okay with that given their involvement in her adultery. This led to all of Jessica's affair partners, now aware of her misdeeds, coming to the company demanding repayment for the money they had spent on her. Then, all meeting face to face, they started another commotion, which eventually made the company aware of the situation. Jessica, who was disowned by her own family, seems to be living alone in a cheap and old apartment.
Home sweet home.
Welcome back. Dinner's ready soon.
Yay! I'm going to wash my hands.
After the divorce, Paul started visiting home occasionally, just like before, spending time with the family. Actually, I was pretty angry about the whole situation and was thinking of banning Paul from coming over for a while, but after he came to our house alone later. I'm truly sorry. He apologized sincerely. I thought to myself that an apology doesn't fix everything, still feeling angry.
It's okay. Mary and I both love you, Paul.
Donald said with a gentle smile, so I couldn't stay mad any longer, and things went back to normal. Have you finished paying off your debts? Yeah, managed with my savings. But now I've used them all up. That was brave of you. The thought of the interest rates sent shivers down my spine. Well, I guess I deserved it. While having dinner, we talked about such things, and Paul chuckled. Despite the tough times, seeing him accept and overcome his mistakes, able to talk about it like this, made me think my son has grown as a person.
Mom, can I have some more?
Of course. Living with just Donald and occasionally having Paul come back home, I felt happy that the three of us could spend time together just like before.